Okay, so this is the conclusion of the Mu Lan story, at least one of the Mu Lan stories. There's many more, lots of different versions. To repeat, this is the version from The Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston. And we've come to the part where she's finished her training and she's gone home to be with her family for a little while before setting out on her mission to liberate the Chinese, the Han people, from an emperor who is despotic. And this is a particularly interesting part. Well, they're all interesting. And that's a depiction, could be, of Mu Lan. In the morning, my parents woke me and asked that I come with them to the family hall. Stay in your night clothes, my mother said. Don't change yet. She was holding a basin, a towel, and a kettle of hot water. My father had a bottle of wine, an ink block, and pens, and knives of various sizes. Come with us, he said. They had stopped the tears with which they had greeted me. Forebodingly, I caught a smell, metallic, the iron smell of blood, as when a woman gives birth, and that as at the sacrifice of a large animal. My mother put a pillow on the floor before the ancestors. So they have the altar with the ancestors where they kneel and make worship to the people who came before them. My mother put a pillow on the floor before the ancestors. Kneel here, she said. Now take off your shirt. I kneeled with my back to my parents so none of us felt embarrassed. My mother washed my back as if I had left for only a day and were her baby yet. We are going to carve revenge on your back, my father said. We are going to carve revenge on your back, my father said. We'll write out oaths and names. Wherever you go, whatever happens to you, people will know our sacrifice, my mother said, and you'll never forget either. She meant that even if I got killed, the people would use my dead body for a weapon, but we do not like to talk out loud about dying. My father first brushed the words in ink, and they fluttered down my back row after row. He took the calligraphy pen and wrote on her back. Then he began cutting. To make fine lines and points, he used thin blades for the stems and large blades. He used to make fine lines and points on the calligraphy. He used thin blades. For the stems, he used large blades. My mother caught the blood and wiped the cuts with a cold towel soaked in wine. It hurt terribly, the cuts sharp, the air burning, the alcohol cold and then hot. Pain so various, I gripped my knees. I released them. Neither tension nor relaxation helped. I wanted to cry. If not for the 15 years of training, I would have writhed on the floor. I would have had to be held down. The list of grievances went on and on. So all of the things that had been done, that the family felt had been done wrong to them, father's writing them all on her back and making like a tattoo using knives. If an enemy should flay me, the light would shine through my skin like lace. So if they took off her skin, they At the end of the last word, I fell forward. Together, my parents sang what they had written, then let me rest. My mother fanned my back. We'll have you with us until your back healed, she said. When I could sit up again, my mother brought two mirrors, and I saw my back covered entirely with words in red and black piles, like an army, like my army. My parents nursed me just as if I had fallen in battle after many victories. Soon I was strong again. A white horse. A white horse stepped into the courtyard where I was polishing my armor. So that's like this here. Okay. A white horse stepped into the courtyard where I was polishing my armor. Though the gates were locked the, though the gates were locked tight. Through the moon door it came, a kingly white horse. It wore a saddle and bridle with red, gold, and black tassels dancing. The saddle was just my size, with tigers and dragons tooled in swirls. The white horse pawed the ground for me to go. On the hooves of its near forefoot and hindfoot was the ideograph to fly. My parents and I had waited for such a sign. We took the fine saddlebags off the horse and filled them with salves and herbs, blue grass for washing my hair, extra sweaters, dried peaches. They gave me a choice of ivory or silver chopsticks. I took the silver ones because they were lighter. It was like getting wedding presents. The cousins and the villagers came bearing bright orange jams, silk dresses, silver embroidery scissors. They brought blue and white porcelain bowls filled with water and carp. The bowls painted with carp, fins like yellow, like orange fire. The carp like a big goldfish. It's a carp. I accepted all the gifts, the tables, the earthenware jugs, though I could not possibly carry them with me, and culled for travel only a small copper cooking bowl. And put away everything except a small copper cooking bowl. I could cook in it and eat out of it and would not have to search for bowl-shaped rocks or tortoise shells. I put on my men's I put on my men's clothes and armor and tied my hair in a man's fashion. How beautiful you look, the people said. How beautiful she looks. A young man stepped out of the crowd. He looked familiar to me, as if he were the old man's son or the old man himself when you looked at him from the corners of your eyes. I want to go with you, he said. You will be the first soldier in my army, I told him. I leapt onto my horse's back and marveled at the power and height it gave me. Just then, galloping out of nowhere, straight at me, came a rider on a black horse. The villagers scattered except for my one soldier who stood calmly in the road. I drew my sword. Wait, shouted the rider, raising weaponless hands. Wait. I've traveled here to join you. Then the villagers relinquished their real gifts to me, their sons, families who had hidden their boys, families who had hidden their boys during the last conscription, volunteered them now. I took the ones their families could spare and the ones with hero fire in their eyes, not the young fathers and not those who would break hearts with their leaving. We were better equipped than many founders of dynasties had been when they walked north to dethrone an emperor. They had been peasants like us. Millions of us had laid our hoes on the dry ground and faced north. We sat in the fields from which the dragon had withdrawn its moisture and sharpened those hoes. Then, excuse me, my eyes are kind of an emotional story sometimes. I don't know why. Ah. Then, though it be 10,000 miles away, we walked to the palace. We would report to the emperor. The emperor, who sat facing south, must have been very frightened. Peasants everywhere walking day and night toward the capital, toward Beijing. But the last emperors of dynasties must not have been facing in the right direction, for they would have seen us and not let us get this hungry. We would not have had to shout our grievances. The peasants would crown as emperor a farmer who knew the earth, or a beggar who understood hunger. So she's reminiscing first about what had happened in the past with emperors who had been dethroned by the peasants, and projecting into the future how they're going to march to the capital because the emperor had not paid any attention to the people, too caught up in himself and his empire to think about the peasants. Thank you, mother. Thank you, father, I said before leaving. They had carved their names and address on me, and I would come back. Often I walked beside my horse to travel abreast of my army. When we had to impress other armies, marauders, columns of refugees filing past one another, boy gangs following their martial arts teachers, I mounted and rode in front. The soldiers who owned horses and weapons would pose fiercely on my left and right. The small bands of people joined us, but sometimes armies of equal or larger strength would fight us. Then, screaming a mighty scream and swinging two swords over my head, I charged the leaders. I released my bloodthirsty army and my straining war horse. I guided the horse with my knees, freeing both hands for sword work, spinning green and silver circles all around me. I inspired my army and I fed them. At night, I sang to them glorious songs that came out of the sky and into my head. When I opened my mouth, the songs poured out and were loud enough for the whole encampment to hear. My army stretched out for a mile. We sewed red flags and tied the red scraps around arms, legs, horses' tails. We wore our red clothes so that when we visited a village, we would look as happy as for New Year's Day. Then people would want to join the ranks. My army did not abuse people, only taking food where there was an abundance. We brought order wherever we went. When I won over a goodly number of fighters, I built up my army enough to attack fiefdoms and to pursue the enemies I had seen in the water gourd. My first opponent turned out to be a giant, as much larger than the toy general I used to peep at in the gourd. During the charge, I singled out the leader, who grew as he ran toward me. Our eyes locked until his height made me strain my neck looking up, my throat so vulnerable to the stroke of a knife that my eyes dropped to the secret death points on the huge body. First, I cut off his leg with one sword swipe, as Chen Luan Feng had chopped the leg off the thunder god. When the giant stumped toward me, I cut off his head. Instantly, he reverted to his true self, a snake, and slithered away hissing. The fighting round me stopped as the combatants' eyes and mouths opened wide in amazement. The giant's spells, now broken, his soldiers, seeing that they had been led by a snake, they pledged their loyalty to me. In the stillness after battle, I looked up at the mountain tops. Perhaps the old man and woman were watching me and would enjoy my knowing it. They'd laugh to see a creature winking at them from the bottom of the water gourd. But on a green ledge above the battlefield, I saw the wives of the giants, the giant that I just killed, saw the giants' wives crying. They climbed out of their palanquins, their sedan chairs they had been carried by servants, to watch their husband fight. They had climbed out of their palanquins to watch their husband fight me, and now they were holding each other, weeping. They were two sisters, two tiny fairies against the sky, widows from now on. Their long undersleeves, which they had pulled out to wipe their tears, flew white mourning in the mountain wind. After a time, they got back into their sedan chairs, and their servants carried them away. I led my army northward, rarely having to sidetrack. The emperor himself sent the enemies I was hunting, chasing after me. The emperor himself sent the enemies I was hunting, chasing after me. Sometimes they attacked us on 2 or 3 sides. Sometimes they ambushed me when I rode ahead. We would always win. Quan Kung, the god of war and literature, riding before me. We would always win. Quan Kung, so that's often you see that statue in the on Chinese altars, Quan Kung. He's shown standing with a spear like this quite often. And a book, on the other hand, is also the god of literature. The god of Quan Kung, the god of war and literature, riding before me. I would be told of in fairy tales myself. I overheard some soldiers, and now there were many who had not met me, say that whenever we went in danger of losing, I made a throwing gesture, and the opposing army would fall, hurled across the battlefield. Hailstones as big as heads would shoot out of the sky, and the lightning would stab like swords, but never those at my side. On his side, they said. And when they're telling, they say on his side. I had never told them the truth. Chinese executed women who disguised themselves as soldiers or students, no matter how bravely they fought or how high they scored on the examinations. One spring morning, I was at work in my tent repairing equipment, patching my clothes, and studying maps, when a voice said, "General, may I visit you in your tent, please?" As if it were my own home, I did not allow strangers in my tent. And since I had no family with me, no one ever visited inside. Riverbanks, hillsides, the cool sloped rooms under the pine trees, China provides her soldiers with meeting places enough. I opened the tent flap, and there in the sunlight stood my own husband, with arms full of wildflowers for me. "You are beautiful," he said, and meant it truly. "I have looked for you everywhere. I've been looking for you since the day that bird flew away with you." We were so pleased with each other, the childhood friend found at last. The childhood friend grown mysteriously grown up. "I followed you, but you skimmed over the rocks until I lost you." He's talking about when she first went off to be trained, how he followed her and tried to keep up with her, but he couldn't. "I followed you, but you skimmed over the rocks until I lost you. I've looked for you too," I said. The tent now snug around us like a secret house when we were kids. "Whenever I heard about a good fighter, I went to see if it were you," I said. "I saw you marry me. I'm so glad you married me." He wept when he took off my shirt and saw the scar words on my back. He loosened my hair and covered the words with it. I turned around and touched his face, loving the familiar first. So for a time I had a partner, my husband and I, soldiers together. Just as when we were little soldiers playing in the village, we rode side by side into battle. When I became pregnant, during the last 4 months, I wore my armor altered so that I looked like a powerful big man, as a fat man. I walked with the foot soldiers so as not to jounce the baby inside. Now, when I was naked, I saw a strange human being. Words carved on my back, and the baby large in front. I hid from battle only once, when I gave birth to our baby. In dark and silver dreams, I had seen him falling from the sky each night closer to the earth, his soul a star. Just before labor began, the last star rays sank into my belly. My husband would talk to me and not go, though I said for him to return to the battlefield. He caught the baby, a boy, and put it on my chest. What are you going to do with this? He asked, holding up the piece of umbilical cord that had been closest to the baby. So when the baby's born, they cut the umbilical cord and they leave a length, a piece. I remember doing that with your father, with Noah, when he was born. So the father asked, what should we do with this? Let's tie it to the flagpole until it dries, I said. We had both seen the boxes in which our parents kept the dried cords of all their children. This one was yours, and this yours, my mother would say to us brothers and sisters, and fill us with awe that she could remember. So they kept the umbilical cords of the little piece of umbilical cord and put them in a box. I don't know what I did with Noah's. We made a sling for the baby inside my big armor and rode back into the thickest part of the fighting. The umbilical cord flew with the red flag and made us laugh. At night, inside our own tent, I let the baby ride on my back. The sling was made of red satin and purple silk. The 4 paisley straps that tied across my breasts and around my waist ended in housewives' pockets lined with a coin, a seed, a nut, and a juniper leaf. Ah, that must be traditional. My waist ended in the housewives' pockets, and the pockets were lined with a coin, a seed, a nut, and a juniper leaf. At the back of the sling, I had sewn a tiny quilted triangle, red at its center against 2 shades of green. It marked the baby's nape for luck. The nape of the neck, back of the neck. I walked bowed, and the baby, or bowed. I walked bowed, not bowed. I walked bowed, bow-legged, and the baby warmed himself against me, his breathing in rhythm with mine, his heart beating like my heart. When the baby was a month old, we gave him a name and shaved his head. For the full month ceremony, my husband had found 2 eggs, which we dyed red by boiling them with a flag. I peeled one and rolled it all over the baby's head. His eyes, his lips, off his bump of a nose, his cheeks, his dear bald head and fontanelle, top of the head. I had brought dried grapefruit peel in my saddlebag, and we also boiled that. We washed our heads and hands in the grapefruit water, dabbing it on the baby's forehead and hands. Then I gave my husband the baby and told him to take it to his family, and I gave him all the money we had taken on raids to take to my family. Go now, I said, before he is old enough to recognize me. While the blur is still in his eyes and the little fists shut tight like buds, I'll send my baby away from me. I altered my clothes and became again the slim young man. Only now I would get so lonely with the tent so empty that I slept outside. So she sends the baby home for safekeeping. My white horse overturned buckets and danced on them. It lifted full wine cups with its teeth. The strong soldiers lifted the horse in a wooden tub while it danced to the stone drums and flute music. I played with the soldiers, throwing arrows into a bronze jar. But I found none of these antics as amusing as when I first set out on the road. It was during this lonely time, when any high cry made the milk spill from my breasts, that I got careless. Wildflowers distracted me so that I followed them, picking one and another until I was alone in the woods. Out from behind trees, springing off branches, came the enemy, their leader looming like a genie out of the water gourd. I threw fists and feet at them, but they were so many, they pinned me to the earth, while their leader drew his sword. My fear shot forth, a quick, jabbing sword that slashed fiercely, silver flashes, quick cuts wherever my attention drove it. So she's got the swords that are appearing out in the air. The leaders stared at the palpable sword swishing, unclutched at his men, then laughed aloud. As if signaled by his laughter, two more swords appeared in midair. They clanged against mine, and I felt metal vibrate inside my brain. I willed my sword to hit back and to go after the head that controlled the other swords. But the man fought well, hurting my brain. The swords opened and closed, scissoring madly, metal, singing along metal. Unable to leave my sky sword to work itself, I would be watching the swords move like puppets when the genie yanked my hair back and held the dagger against my throat. Aha, he said, what have we here? He lifted the bead pouch out of my shirt and cut the string. I grabbed his arm, but one of his swords dived towards me and I rolled out of the way. A horse galloped up and he leapt on it, escaping into the forest, the beads in his fist. His sword fought behind him until I heard him shout, I am here, and they flew to his side. So I had done battle with the prince who had mixed the blood of his two sons with the metal he had used for casting his swords. So she survived, but she lost the beads that the old people had given him. I ran back to my soldiers and gathered the fastest horsemen for pursuit. Our horses ran like the little white water horses in the surf. Across a plain, we could see the enemy, a dust devil rushing toward the horizon. Wanting to see, I focused my eyes as the eagles had taught me, and there the genie would be, shaking one bead out of the pouch and casting it at us. Nothing happened. No thunder, no earthquake that split open the ground, no hailstones as big as beads or as big as heads. Stop, I ordered my riders. Our horses are exhausted, and I don't want to chase any farther south. The rest of the victories would be won on my own, slow and without shortcuts. So she had fought with the genie. And when the genie threw the beads that the old people had given her and nothing happened, she decided to give up the pursuit and not go because south is away from the emperor. And they wanted to go north. I stood on top of the last hill before Beijing and saw the roads below me flow like living rivers. Between the roads, the woods and plains moved too. The land was peopled, the Han people, the people of 100 surnames marching with one heart, our tatters flying. The depth and width of joy were exactly known to me. The Chinese population. After much hardship, a few of our millions had arrived together at the capital. We faced our emperor personally. We beheaded him, cleaned out the palace, and inaugurated the peasant who would begin the new order. In his rags, he sat on the throne facing south, and we, a great red crowd, bowed to him 3 times. He commended some of us who were his first generals. I told the people who had come with me that they were free to go home now. But since the Long Wall, that is the Great Wall of China, was so close, I would go see it. They could come along if they liked. So, loath to disband after such high adventures, we reached the northern boundary of the world, as the northern boundary of the Chinese world, chasing the Mongols en route. I touched the long wall with my own fingers, running the edge of my hand between the stones, tracing the grooves the builder's hands had made. We lay our foreheads and our cheeks against the long wall and cried like the women who had come here looking for their men so long building the wall. In my travels north, I had not found my brother. Carrying the news about the new emperor, I went home, where one more battle awaited me. The baron who had drafted my brother would still be bearing sway over our village. Having dropped my soldiers off at crossroads and bridges, I attacked the baron's stronghold alone. I jumped over the double walls and landed with swords drawn and knees bent, ready to spring. When no one accosted me, I sheathed the swords and walked about like a guest until I found the baron. He was counting his money, his fat ringed fingers playing over the abacus, the counting tool that the Chinese invented, the abacus. Who are you? What do you want? He said, encircling his profits with his arms. He sat square and fat like a god. I want your life in payment for your crimes against the villagers. I haven't done anything to you. All this is mine. I earned it. I didn't steal it from you. I've never seen you before in my life. Who are you? I am a female avenger. Then, heaven help him, he tried to be charming, to appeal to me, man to man. Oh, come now. Everyone takes the girls when he can. The families are glad to be rid of them. Girls are maggots in the rice. It is more profitable to raise geese than daughters. He quoted to me the saying I hated. Regret what you've done before I kill you, I said. I haven't done anything other men, even you, would have done in my place. So he won't take a word that that it's a female. You took away my brother. I free my apprentices. He was not an apprentice. China needs soldiers in wartime. You took away my childhood. I don't know what you're talking about. We've never met before. I've done nothing to you. You've done this, I said, and ripped off my shirt to show him my back. You are responsible for this. When I saw his startled eyes at my breasts, I slashed him across the face, and on the second stroke, cut off his head. I pulled my shirt back on and opened the house to the villagers. The baron's family and servants hid in closets and under beds. The villagers dragged them out into the courtyard where they tried them next to the beheading machine. Did you take my harvest so that my children had to eat grass? A weeping farmer asked. I saw him steal seed grain, another testified. My family was hiding under the thatch on the roof when the bandits robbed our house, and we saw this one take off his mask. They spared those who proved they could be reformed, but not others. I searched the house, hunting out people for trial. I came upon a locked room. When I broke down the door, I found women, cowering, whimpering women. I heard shrill insect noises and scurrying. They blinked weakly at me, like pheasants who have been raised in the dark for soft meat. The servants who walked the ladies had abandoned them. They could not escape on their little bound feet. So these were the women of the court who had bound feet, which was one of the more egregious, one of the more terrible customs of ancient China. They would take women's feet and bind them up until, because small feet were supposed to be beautiful, but it would make it so that they couldn't walk without assistance. They were called lily pods. That's why Shakina named our dog Lily Pod. Some crawled away from me, using their elbows to pull themselves along. These women would not be good for anything. I called the villagers to come identify any daughters they wanted to take home, but no one claimed any. I gave each woman a bag full of rice, which they sat on. They rolled the bags to the road. They wandered away like ghosts. Later, it would be said they turned into the band of swordswomen who were a mercenary army. So they converted themselves into avenging women. They did not wear men's clothes like me, but rode as women in black and red dresses. They brought up girl babies so that many poor families welcomed their visitations. When slave girls and daughters-in-law ran away, people would say they joined these witch Amazons. They killed men and boys. I myself never encountered such women and could not vouch for their reality. After the trials, we tore down the ancestral tablets. We'll use this great hall for village meetings, I announced. Here, we'll put on operas, we'll sing together and talk story. We washed the courtyard. We exorcised the house with smoke and red paper. We exorcised the house with smoke and red paper. This is a new year, I told the people, the year one. I went home to my parents-in-law and husband and son. My son stared, very impressed by the general he had seen in the parade, but his father said, "It's your mother. Go to your mother." My son was delighted that the shiny general was his mother too. She gave him her helmet to wear and her swords to hold. Wearing my black embroidered wedding coat, I knelt at my parents-in-law feet as I would have done as a bride. Now my public duties are finished, I said. I will stay with you doing farm work and housework and giving you more sons. Go visit your mother and father first, my mother-in-law said. She was a generous woman. They want to welcome you. My mother and father and the entire clan would be living happily on the money I had sent them. My parents had bought their coffins. They would sacrifice a pig to the gods that I had returned. From the words on my back and how they were fulfilled, the villagers would make a legend about my perfect filiality. And that is one of the stories of Mu Lan, the woman warrior. That's it. Hope you enjoyed it.